Chapter 7. The Proposal. There was only one more week left before Margaret would be going back to Suffield. Lloyd didn't have much time to find out what he wanted to know about her, but she was learning every day to like him better, though she still felt very insecure. The thought of having to leave him without his telling her he loved her was almost more than she could bear. However, she had a strong premonition that he would. Up to this time, neither of them had made any demonstration of love-making. Only the thrill of being in each other's company and hearing him say flattering things to her occasionally was all she really had to judge by. Every night she prayed about it. What she did not know was that Lloyd was praying about it too. After a prayer meeting on Wednesday night of that last week, Lloyd asked Margaret to ride out to his home with him while he took his sisters home. On their way back, they again headed for the lake at Higman Park, which seemed to be a favorite spot for them. After walking along the shore for a ways in the moonlight, they sat down on a bench not far from the water and watched the stars and talked and listened to the musical sound of the waves as they washed against the shore. A quote from Margaret's diary. When they got back home that night, it seemed as if every nerve in Margaret's body tingled. Before Lloyd left, she gave him a box of fudge she had made for him that afternoon. The next afternoon, Lloyd came again to take Margaret for a ride. This time Rachel went with them, so there was no chance to talk alone. But they had fun just doing silly little things like exchanging their watches, taking off a ring Margaret was wearing and putting it on his tie, and best of all, sitting very close together on the sand and talking. They were at Thunder Mountain now, far back from the main highway, on the shores of Lake Michigan. It was a glorious spot, and the atmosphere was crisp and clear, with a little foretaste of fall in the air. Not another person was in the area. The beach was deserted for miles. After a while, Rachel withdrew for a few minutes to pick up some pebbles on the beach, and as they sat there on the sand, Lloyd looked straight into Margaret's eyes and asked, "There's a question I've wanted to ask you ever since that night I met you at Uncle Lou's." Margaret's heart skipped a couple of beats. Was he at last going to ask her the all-important question she had been so eager to hear? "Margaret," he asked very seriously, "are you engaged?" Well, this wasn't exactly what she had expected him to say, but she made no hesitation in answering him. Looking him straight in the eye, but with a touch of longing in her voice, she quickly replied, "No, Lloyd, I'm not engaged." Oh, if it were only proper to add, "but I would like to be to you," she realized that would be in very poor taste, so she remained silent. Before either of them had an opportunity to continue their conversation further, Rachel returned and threw herself down on the sand beside them. Their own private conversation would have to be postponed to a more appropriate time when they could talk confidentially. So, for a time, they just watched a big flock of seagulls swoop in and out of the water, and a large bird with long legs and neck, which Lloyd said was a crane, waddling along near the shore. Some long-billed sandpipers flitting along over the wet sand as if they were being propelled by mechanical wings were fascinating to observe also. It was so enchanting by the lake, Margaret's diary records, that we could not bear to leave, but leave they must. It was after 5 o'clock. They had all been gone all afternoon, and dinner was to be at 6. Everyone seemed to be playing into the hands of the young lovers. Eulyn, who had been mistress of the parsonage for several days while her mother was in Evanston visiting her sister, invited Lloyd to stay for supper. Surely the Clivers were doing all they could to promote this love affair. He had to leave immediately after the meal in order to get his sisters to the church in time for their choral rehearsal. "Come back if you can," the girls called to him as he hurried out to his car. They scarcely expected to see him again that night, but just in case, Margaret went to her room to tidy up and comb her long tresses. Shortly after 8 o'clock, he called her to ask if he might come up to deliver a present he had for her. Of course she was delighted, and consented with pleasure. The gift was a box of vanity fudge of his sisters had made for her. Margaret was happy in the thought that he was in the good graces of his family as well as hers. In an intimate conversation with her aunt, who returned from her trip the following day, she said to Margaret, "Your trip has been like the end of a perfect day." How understanding her Aunt Mattie was. Even before Margaret was certain about Lloyd's feelings for her, she wrote in regards to her aunt's remark, "It surely is. I came out here a very unhappy girl, and I'm going back, I know, one of the happiest girls in the world." What made her so very sure? She seemed to possess an uncanny extrasensory perception in this regard. In spite of any turning aside while she was in high school, Margaret had formed a picture in her mind of the kind of man she wanted to marry, and it seemed to her that Lloyd fit these qualifications perfectly. Many girls make mistakes in their teens. They simply are not willing to wait until the right man comes along. Margaret had been impatient in waiting, it is true, but God had protected her all along the way. She was sure of that now, and it seemed as if he had a big part in bringing her into the presence of a man who fit her idea precisely of a perfect lover and husband. Yet there was also a semblance of doubt, for fear things might not turn out as she anticipated. "Perhaps tonight he will propose to me," she thought, as she got dressed to go to a party which the young people of the church were having on a Friday night, and she was going home the next Tuesday, only 3 more days to be together. Friends of Francis and Ewan were coming up from Sawyer on the train to attend the party. Both boys were in Lloyd's Baraka class, and from very fine families. Their parents lived in town in the winter, but their summer residence was in Sawyer on the lake bluff. This night the train was late, and it did not arrive until 9:15. Everyone at the parsonage waited for them, and when they came, all the young folks walked over to the party together. Margaret noted in her diary how well she and Lloyd walked together. Strange how exuberant she felt when she was by his side. The party lasted until midnight. After Margaret went to her room that night, she took out her diary and wrote, "I was so proud to think I was the girl who came with Lloyd tonight. I love that man, and somehow I feel as if he's going to tell me he loves me too, and it just seems as if we were meant for each other." Yet up to this time there had been very little demonstration in terms of affection shown on the part of either of them. Nevertheless, as they parted on the night after the party, he said, "I have had a wonderful time tonight," and then added, "You've got more common sense than any girl I've ever met." But when he told her that he had certainly learned to like her in the last 2 weeks, she wondered how he could keep from asking her to marry him right then. All he said that night was, "I appreciate you, Margaret." Appreciate is not the right word, for it is more than an appreciation. Margaret was grateful that she commanded his respect, and that he had such a high regard for her. She only hoped she was worthy of all the nice things he was saying about her. She made up her mind she would try to be, and continue to keep herself in restraint at all times when she was with him. The next morning she wrote a letter to her sister in Suffield, telling her about the newly found lover. "Lloyd is just the kind of man you would expect me to choose as my husband," it read. "I am glad that I have the hope of having a home of my own some day, when I can make the man I love infinitely happy." Then she queried, "Do you suppose it will be Lloyd?" That same day, Margaret had no idea of seeing Lloyd, but he realized as well as she that the time was going short when they could be together. So in the middle of the afternoon he called to see if she would like to take a short little ride. They would be all alone. Surely, he thought, this will be the day. They were only gone an hour or so, and though just being together gave both of them great pleasure, nothing in particular happened, and nothing of serious nature was said. The time seemed to be slipping by so fast. Why is he waiting? She wondered. Well, finally, the great day came, and Margaret's dreams came true. It happened on the next day, Sunday, August 31st, 1919. This is how her diary states the excitement of that thrilling moment. "This is the most eventful day in my young life," she exulted. The great day had come at last, and she rejoiced triumphantly. "I am oh so happy," she continued, "for at 4:15 this afternoon, on a high bluff overlooking Lake Michigan at Camp Gray, I was proposed to by the most wonderful man of God ever created, Lloyd Albert Zoschke." Lloyd's mother had invited Margaret to come to their home for dinner that Sunday. After getting acquainted with the family, Lloyd and Margaret took a stroll around the farm. He showed her the grapes, which were hanging in luscious bunches on the vines in the vineyard, and they stopped to sample some of the peaches and pears that were just beginning to ripen in the orchard. They walked through the bean patch, and she admired the big flat lima bean pods, which were growing in such profusion on their green vines, and he showed her the asparagus patches, now turning russet-colored, with their feathery branches waving in the soft breeze as it blew gently through the field. Then he suggested that they take a little spin in the flivver. So they returned to the house, and he drove out toward Lake Michigan. Leaving their car in the grove, they crossed a ravine and climbed to the hill to the top of the bluff overlooking the lake. The wind was blowing quite briskly now, and the waves were high. The two young lovers sat down on a grassy knoll and ardently talked for a while. Finally, Lloyd said fervently, "I have something I want to tell you, Margaret." He hesitated a minute, as she breathlessly awaited his next words. "I could almost tell you in French," he said, "if you wanted me to." Margaret's mind wandered back to one night 2 weeks previous, when it would be fun. He told her that all the French he knew was how to propose to a girl. She was so excited that she could hardly believe it, though this is what she had been waiting to hear for so long. "I would rather hear you say it in English," she said demurely. Then it was that he told her how much he loved her. He told her that he was sure God had sent her to him that eventful summer. "I have been praying and looking for you for years," he said fervently. Margaret was extremely happy that she drank in every word he said. They were sitting very close together now, but there were no outward demonstrations of love given, only those simple, direct, and true words which meant so much, her diary records. In order to be completely honest with herself and with him, she told him briefly about her former engagement. She was so forthright about her recital that Lloyd told her he admired her for telling him, and liked her much better for it. "We'll let bygones be bygones, and forget it completely," he said reassuringly. Now their happiness was complete. She had confessed the thing that had been bothering her most, and he had absolved her completely. It was getting late in the afternoon, and by the time they would arrive back at his home, it would be time for supper. So they rose from the knoll where they had been sitting and took a picture of the lake. They wanted to remember this enchanting spot forever. When they arrived back at the farm, they said not a word to his folks about the events of that afternoon, but their faces glowed with joy, and they blushed as their eyes met as they sat facing each other across the table. No one seemed to notice. They did a little teasing, but that was all. Lloyd's mother and sisters were slightly perturbed, but they made no mention of it. Although their brother seemed to be vitally interested in this girl, it was no doubting a passing fascination, and after she would go home the interest would soon wear off, they were sure. After all, she seemed like a nice girl, and she was related to the Clivers, and it was only being courteous for Lloyd to show her a good time while she was here. Very soon she'd be 1,000 miles away, and his interest in her would probably wane. After church that evening, Lloyd invited Margaret to ride out to the farm while he drove his family back home. When she timidly approached her aunt about it, she said reassuringly, "Why, of course, go." After leaving the family at home, the two young lovers drove down a little lane in the midst of a cherry orchard and brought the car to a halt. There, with the moon shining on them out of a clear sky, Lloyd put his arms gently around Margaret's shoulders and told her that he should always look upon her as the greatest gift God had ever given him. "And he sent you for my 25th birthday present," he added. Then he kissed her fervently for the first time. They both felt very sure that their finding each other was providential and that God was smiling on us tonight, as Margaret wrote in her diary later. She thought that he was the most sensible young man she had ever met, and most assuredly the handsomest. Best of all, their temperaments seemed to be in perfect harmony. When they got back to the parsonage that night, Lloyd said, "We've had a wonderful time today," and Margaret gave her assent as they fondly kissed each other good night.